Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Thursday Live with me, Dr. Jen. I am excited to be here because I love topics that have to do with communication, right? Communication is such an important skill, and I believe that there are some small changes that when parents, learn to make in their everyday interaction with their children, it really does has powerful impact on the results that you get on your journey. I hope that you've been doing okay. And for those who are joining in again, you're welcome back. And for those who are tuning in for the first time, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're watching this and you've never subscribed to the channel, please do so. That way, whenever we put up any content, you will be notified and you can keep up with every single session that we have here. So we meet here every Thursday live, right? Every Thursday, there is a new live session that comes up on all things purposeful parenting. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the silent damage of common parenting phrases. Every parent has their anthem, right? Every parent has certain phrases that they use very often. But the truth is, we usually don't pay attention to it. All right. These are things that you say without thinking, instinctively. Why are you so slow? Why are you so lazy? You're so careless. These are things that come up usually in our moments of frustration, our moments when we feel stressed, and when we keep encountering the same challenges with or with a particular child. Usually there's a phrase that comes out, right? And this session is all about helping you shine the light on what your phrases might be and be able to ask yourself whether you are willing or you would love the harvest that that phrase is going to bring, because we forget, we don't even just remember the fact that every word is a seed and every seed will bring a harvest. When we can think of it in that way, it helps us to be more intentional. I share the story often of how my husband and I, when we just got married, before we even started having kids, we made an agreement, particularly in the area of how we use our words. We started working on, being very intentional with the things that we say to our children. Now, if you call any of my kids and ask them if mom or dad has ever insulted them, right? All the big head, stupid, all those kinds of words, they'll tell you no. And I'm not saying this, to give you any idea of thinking that maybe we are perfect. No, we are not perfect. But in this particular area, we had set our course very early and had been doing the work, right? First mentally, to ensure that we build that verbal discipline, because we understood that we do not want to reap a harvest because of a label that we spoke in a moment of frustration or anger. Because usually the emotions that you feel, right, those difficult emotions will sometimes squeeze you. I often say that parenting is like, a glass. Think of a glass, right, that has cracks on it. You might not notice the crack. You might not notice the crack. But if you apply pressure on that glass, it's usually going to break in the area where there was already a crack. So the cracks reveal or give way whenever you come under pressure. So there are certain things that we think about our children, right? We just think the thought in your head. You haven't said it yet, but you're thinking it, right? You think about, maybe this child is disturbing, this child is so difficult. You have not said it yet, but this thought about this particular child keeps coming to your mind, and that's where it starts from, right? How you think about your children. When you permit certain thoughts to multiply in your mind about a particular child, it doesn't matter what you know about all of this, consequences of speaking the wrong words. But if you keep nursing those thoughts about that child in your mind, when you're going to come under pressure, that word is going to finally escape your mouth. So that's where it starts from, right? Your perspective, how you think of your child, even in those moments of difficulty. The thoughts that you allow to marinate in your mind about the child will eventually become words that you release. All right. So there's this scripture, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. It says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." So long as you have words that you release, then there are going to be fruits that those words are going to produce. But I want us to focus in this session to look at some of the things that I'm going going to try to talk about some of the very easy because they believe, I haven't really used any big bad word, but these phrases that we often use, we're going to look in this session, see in this session about how these phrases end up shaping our children or end up bringing a harvest that we would not want as parents. For example, right? I gave the for those who read the um uh intro post about this particular session. I started with, you are careless. What was the first one I used? I can't even remember what it was. There was the first phrase, there was the first I think that's one of the most common. You never listen. I think if there has to be, if the parents had to vote, I think that that particular phrase will be the most commonly used parenting phrase. You never listen. You never listen. Let me hear from you in the comments, right? What do you think are some of the common parenting phrases that parents often use? You know, not necessarily because they are bad. We're not listing them because they are bad, but we just want to look at them in this session to see if potentially this phrase might have some silent damage or some silent consequences that is going to bring that you might not necessarily have thought of it in that direction. We're going to look at some in this session. So, like I said earlier, these are things that we say in moments of challenge, in moments of stress, in moments of anxiety, moments when we are going through maybe some kind of difficulty with the child. This phrase usually just escapes, usually comes out in that moment. For example, the child that constantly goes against your instruction, or the child who is always trying to talk when you're talking, trying to explain, and you're trying to get the child to hear what you're saying and the child is still not listening. The phrase will obviously escape your mouth. You never listen. So yes, it comes out very innocently because the parent does not intend harm. Most of the time, some of these common phrases that look very simple are not born from a place where the parent is trying to harm the child. It's not really like using those labels where you call a child stupid or foolish or all of those things, right? It's not necessarily a big bad label, but these phrases we're going to look at in this session are things that we say that seem harmless, but will bring a harvest that you will not want as a parent. That's what we're going to be looking at. So I'd like to hear from you in the comments, right? Are there any phrases that you heard as a child? For me, it was you're too careless, you're so careless. And I'm going to share later about how that statement, how that phrase, right, shaped my perception of myself, especially when I made a mistake, when I made or when I lost something, when I acted in a way that had to do with maybe damage or loss. I myself will repeat the phrase that I used to hear my parents use when I was growing up. That's exactly the kind. So it's a kind of silent programming, right? You don't intend to harm your child, but imagine saying it over and over and over and over and over and over. Yeah, thank you. You never listen, right? You imagine saying it over and over and over. Why you did so exactly, right? I'm laughing because these are very common things. So imagine hearing that over and over and over and over about yourself, even if you don't like it. Even if you don't like what your parent was is saying to you in the moment, you find out that even you guys are cracking me up here. You find out that eventually you start saying the same thing about yourself. All right, you start saying it about yourself. So words are seeds, and every word that we plant in our children's hearts will grow into something. The question is that a harvest you'll be joyfully going to receive, or is that a harvest that will make you lament? So which one is it? All right. Now, someone write this in the comments. Children grow into the words they hear most often. Children will grow into the words that they hear most often. All right. So, oh my God. So that, yeah, thank you so much, the parents. Please feel the comments with a lot of those phrases, right? Let's shine the light on them, and then we're going to try to take apart as many as we can in this session, so that we can all leave here enlightened, and can all leave here, hopefully having raised our awareness of our own parenting anthem, those things that we say very often that we need to start, working towards cutting it back, and most hopefully taking it off completely. So thank you for keep dropping the comments, the phrases that you can remember in the comments as we go. So Your anthem of parenting is, like I said earlier, something that you're saying over and over and over and over and over and over. When we're in school, right, we sang the anthem every single day. So an anthem is something that you do over and over. So what is your parenting anthem? This, before the session comes to an end, try to find your own parenting anthem, because for this session to really be impactful for you, you want to shine light on those things that you say too often to your children, and then ask yourself if this will heal, will build, or will break and possibly damage your child's person. All right. So think of one phrase that you heard often as a child. How did it make you feel? I think I started talking about my own story. One of the things that I remember hearing very often when I was growing up was, "You are too careless. You're very careless." And I also heard, I had it said to me when I was going to to boarding school, that I'm sure that when you, because you're very careless, that when you go, you come back with an empty trunk. That it stayed with me. And like I said, even though the parent not necessarily saying it to intentionally hurt you, but these words stay with our children. And even as an adult, whenever I before I really began working, before I became purposeful, whenever I would make a mistake, kick my leg or drop something, or mess up something, I'll say, "Child Jennifer, you're too careless." So I would say that about myself. And when I began really working on myself, I began assessing those things, the things my own self-talk, because your self-talk is a reflection of where you're coming from. It's a reflection of the environment in which you grew up in, because our environment usually places labels on us. So I began to assess my self-talk. What do I say to myself in my difficult moments? What do I say to myself about my weaknesses, my strengths? What do I have to say to myself, and where is it coming from? Does what the things I say to myself, is this who I want to be? Is this who I think I am? Is this like a sentence, or this is something that I think that I can actually work on and break free from? So it stays with your child. It doesn't just go away because it's just a word. So no word is ever just a word. All right. And you can't keep saying, "I don't mean it." I didn't mean it now. Why are you getting upset? Every word released is a seed. When a child hears, "You are lazy," what do they begin to believe? They begin to believe that laziness defines them. You might think that by saying that to your child often, you are trying to, raise their awareness about laziness, to help them to become more hardworking. But think about it. Which child has ever become more hardworking by hearing very often, "You are too lazy. You're a lazy child. You're a lazy boy"? Is there any, can you give me any example of anyone who became better by constantly being told that they were very lazy? I can't think of any, because there isn't, right? Because that is the seed that you're planting. That's the label you're putting on the child. That is how you're programming their mind. They will always think of themselves as lazy. Where am I so lazy? Have you ever try to think about your own self-talk? Have you ever caught yourself saying something to yourself that you begin to wonder if you're the one that said that about yourself, or did someone else say it and then you just echoed it? You will understand that there are some of these labels that we have carried all through right into adulthood that still continue to shape how we see ourselves silently. You don't realize it, but usually it comes out in those moments, usually of your weakness, or moments when you're not really proud of yourself. Then those labels start coming out. You start saying those things about your own self. So behavior follows belief. The things we say often to our children become self-fulfilling prophecies. If every word is a seed, then every word is a prophecy, right? Because as you keep increasing your the amount that you're planting in the soil, you're also multiplying the harvest that is going to come. So this phrase we say to our kids over and over becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. They are going to come to pass. They are going to bring a harvest, because behavior follows belief. Children act out the identity that they have been given. Now, the frustrating thing is that usually we say these things because we are hoping for change, right? But no amount of multiplication of the negative label will ever bring the change that you want to see. If you keep telling your child, "You're so wicked," "Oh, you stress me," "Oh, why you did so," "Oh, you are too dumb," or mumu, all those things that sometimes parents say to their kids, it's never going to bring the opposite of what you're saying to the child. But if you think about it, right, if you can change what you're saying, into what you want to see, then of course there's hope that you can actually see better. Because children also tend to live up to our expectations, right? So when you voice out your expectations in that manner, it also empowers them to be able to try to live up to it. So another thing that we do often sometimes is the comparison damage. So I've talked about how labels become identity. When a child hears you are lazy, you are foolish, you are stupid, you can't do anything right. That one is really, really tough. Why can't you ever do anything right? So that person, is programmed to believe that they just can't get it right. So they always go in expecting to fail. And yet we are surprised when they keep bringing back multiplied failure. All right. So they begin that failure defines them. That no matter what they do, no matter the amount of effort they put in, they are still going to fail anyway. So what's the point trying? Whenever they fail, they're like, anyway, that's who they said I am. So that's who I am. So behavior follows belief. Children will act out the identity that you give to them. So if you're giving them what you don't want to see, then you're preparing yourself for more frustration. Now, comparison damage is another thing I want us to talk about today, right? Another common phrase that parents make, particularly in moments of frustration, is the tendency to compare. I think that one of the areas where, truly, from my own personal experience, because this is one area where I have built, not just me, my husband and I, but built intense muscles, if I can call it that, right? To help us be able to mitigate the things, or to control, the things that come out of our mouth in the area of comparison. Now, I have 4 kids, and I I can't I to the best of my knowledge, I have never said to any of my kids, why can't you be like your brother? Not because I lack reasons to want to say so, right? For example, if my third child cleans the kitchen and my first cleans the kitchen, that is a good scenario to want to say, big as you are, why can't you do this like your junior brother? So I have lots of those kinds of scenarios. But I think it comes, just enlightening yourself about first what it felt like for you to hear that from your parent, right? Because for me, I have had first-hand experience of how hurtful comparison. I think all of us have anyway. I hardly think there's anyone who has not been compared either to their sibling or maybe to some other child around you, maybe even at your job site, right? Comparison. It hurts. So when you settle these things mentally, right, and you actually meditate on these things, it empowers you to be able to completely dismantle it. It doesn't even occur to you as a possibility because you have first of all you kill the thought every time it comes to your mind. Because of course the thoughts will come to your mind. You'll be like, look at the way this one has done. Look at it. How can this small one be better than the big one? And then that's where the comparison comes from. It comes from you nursing those thoughts in your mind. Nursing the thoughts. Comparing your children mentally will eventually become life comparison. You cannot separate the two. You can't separate your thoughts from your words because your thoughts eventually become your words. Every word that you speak was first a thought. All right, it first occurred in your mind. No word that we speak comes from the abyss. It all comes from the farm in your mind. That's where it comes from. So when you don't first of all fix it there, catch yourself, right? Thinking of kind of things about your kids. Those moments where you sit and you're comparing your kids in your mind, you're just watching at them and you're comparing, this one is so this one is so that. Look at this other one. Why can't she be like her brother? Eventually, when pressure comes, that statement will escape your mouth. Why can't you be like? Why can't you be like? But one thing that you can do as you try to do the repair to change, the way you communicate with your kids or these common phrases that you might be using, is to learn to at least apologize when you say those things. It helps you. That's a big part of accountability. If you're working to change how you talk to your kids, right? Some of these phrases that we've talked about, the few we've talked about, if you're working to change those things, in the beginning, you're still going to be saying them every now and then. But then if you take it upon yourself that every time I say things to my kids that are not helpful, that are damaging, I will take accountability for it in the moment. I will apologize. Make it a habit to apologize to your children. It helps your children understand that even adults are still learning and there is no shame in making mistakes so long as you're learning from them and improving. So another thing I want us to talk about today is the fact that you need to work on parents need to really work on separating the moment from the person. One of the reasons why parents struggle with labels is because we have this difficulty separating the the behavior from the child, you know. And I think I've posted on this a couple of times. The child who does a foolish thing is not a foolish child. One is a label, one describes a behavior. So instead of saying you are so foolish, what you did was that was a foolish thing to do. One has labeled the action while the other has condemned the child. They are not the same thing. Of course, you can tell one if because when you put your child, you tell your child this thing you did is a foolish thing, and then you invite the child up to higher wisdom. Than saying you are a foolish child, it means that no matter what you do, only foolishness will come out of you. So they're not the same thing. Because when you say it's a foolish thing to do, it leaves it in that moment. But when you say you're a foolish child, it means foolishness follows them everywhere they go. And that's hard to escape. So separating the moment or the behavior from the child is a very, very big thing that every parent needs to practice. Practice separating your child from their behavior. The child that has a lazy attitude is different from a child who is a lazy child. Lazy attitude, lazy child. So you're defining the attitude, not the child per se. The child that does something that is wicked. That was a wicked thing to do. You are a wicked child. They're not the same thing. And these small changes in how we phrase those words makes a big difference in how our children end up seeing themselves and believing, about themselves. So take note of that one in particular. Separate the behavior from the child. Practice it. Practice it in your own quiet time. I've given a few examples. You can practice a few in the comments if you want. A child that does a foolish thing is not a foolish child. So what you did was very foolish. It's not the same as you are very foolish. What you did was very foolish is different from you are very foolish. And you can also add beyond that, you tell your child, I know that you can do better. So that tells the child that there is room for improvement. Now, even positive labels can also limit the child. There are some positive things, good things that sometimes we say to our children that can limit their growth. One of those things, I think I've talked about this before on one of my posts, is this habit of calling children, using the good and bad label on children depending on how they behave. You're a good boy. You're a good girl. I think every parent here should at least, have this amongst their anthems that they use. Good boy, good girl. It's very common in our context. It's very common in our society. We often label children good or bad depending on their behavior. We could still take it back to what I just said earlier. Separate the child from their behavior. But this also applies even when they do things that are positive. Instead of just telling your child, good girl, good boy, it doesn't really tell them. Good is too generic. If you want your child to really be able to produce more in that area, then be specific. Label what you want to see more of clearly. You were very patient with your sister today. That was really good. I saw you sharing with your sister. That was very kind of you. So that points to the child's character. That points to the character traits that you want to see. It's very vague. Praise is a very big tool when it comes to training your children. But praise has to be used right. Most parents praise their kids by just saying, good boy, good girl. Yeah, those are positive statements. But then it tells your child that I am either good or I am bad. Meaning that even when the child does a bad thing, in that moment they feel like their entire value, their entire person is bad. That's why it's very important for us to raise our children, teaching them how to, separate their actions from their person, their worth, their value. So I love how you showed kindness. I appreciate your patience. You were very patient today with your junior brother. What you did was you showed a lot of integrity. So talk about character traits. When we just use good or bad, children learn to define themselves by very small measures. That if I made a mistake, it makes me bad. All of me is bad. And if I until I do something good, then I am not good. So that's how it shapes the child's mindset. But when we raise our children, training them to focus on particular traits, it teaches the child, also shows the child what to do better the next time. When you just say that was you're a very good boy, you come, you see your kitchen, you say, ah, good boy, good girl, you are eating together. But the child doesn't know exactly what it is that you're appreciating in that moment, which can also give them feedback to know what to keep doing more of. When you tell your children, when you tell your child, let's say you left your toddler with their 5 year old sibling, and you come back, you notice that the bigger child, has done something really nice with the younger one. You point it out. That was a very kind thing. That was very kind of you. So your child knows that this thing I did is positive. That is the good. That is what I want to try to do more of. Instead of just saying good girl, good boy, bad girl. So of course I'm not going to talk about the bad one because we understand that that's a bad label. All right. So speak to the child that you are raising, not just the child in the moment. If you can remember this, it will help you rephrase some things that you're saying. Speak to the child that you are raising. That means you remember that the child themselves is good, because the Bible says that God has given us good and perfect gifts. So every child is a good and perfect gift. Every, even in those moments where their behavior doesn't say those things. The child themselves is good. It's a gift. So the gift is always good, but the behavior will not always be good. But you have to separate the two. This helps us, be able to nurture our children's esteem, even just by our daily conversation. Because I said in my post, I said earlier that some of the most important things about parenting are the small moments. Why? Because there are so many of them and they add up to impact the results that you're getting. Yes, many parents will see, maybe you have like a Sunday evening where you take your kids, you prophesy on them. That is good. It's a seed, right? Now, imagine that you've done that one time in the week, but for the rest of that week, you had planted a heavy, lots of seeds that completely contradict what you just did. So you see that it's about the small moments. So if you don't work to reframe the things that you're saying in those your small moments, you're saying it over and over and over and over, you see how it's going to still multiply to negatively impact your harvest. So if you're here today and if you're watching this as a replay, so just sit back and ask yourself, what is my parenting anthem? What is the content of my anthem? For those of you who've actually gone through our Cameroonian anthem, it has some very, very powerful phrases there about our nation, right? So it's the same thing. If you have an anthem you're singing to your children every day, oh, these children, you will not kill me. You stress me. Why are you always disturbing me? So your kids learn that my needs are a bother to my parent. Your kids learn that I am a nuisance. Somebody said, I think one of the phrases somebody put here was, you're too mouthy. You're too mouthy. Why you dey so lazy bird? Yeah, another one. You over slow. Yeah, you're too slow. You're too dumb. Child. Children will grow into the words they hear more often. Yes. So behavior follows belief. Behavior follows belief. It looks small, but if you can work to change the things that you're saying to your children, especially when they misbehave, it will significantly influence not just the behaviors that you see, but also how your child comes to think of themselves. So why do these phrases not work? Why? Because they train the children to expect external motivation only. The good boy, good girl, or kids who just wait until you yell or criticize before they start doing what you want. So they already know. So since you already know that I'm lazy, there's no point trying to impress you. So if I'm a lazy girl, I'm the lazy girl of the house. What's the point trying to impress somebody who already thinks I'm lazy? Because your kids notice that no matter what they do, you always come back to that your phrase. You always come back to that your phrase. Think about the ones your parents used to say to you. The ones they used to say to me were so painful. Every time you hear it, the anger just starts bubbling up, even as a child, because you don't like to be called that. I'm sure some of you here can testify of some of the reactions our children give when we use some of these phrases on them. You're too slow. You see the child start frowning. The child is not happy. Because sometimes the child is actually making an effort, but it's not yet up to your expectation. But the label does not help them do better. The negative label doesn't help them do better. All right. You can't get your child to be better by calling their behavior exactly what it is, or labeling them according to the behavior that they are showing you in the moment. So they also damage connection, right? Again, go back to when you were a child. Think about how it felt to hear your parents say those things about you. Fortunately, growing up, my parents were not the insultive type, particularly my dad. I don't remember ever hearing my dad, insult, like, some of the things that, some of the real body shaming, negative things that some parents say to their kids. Oh, you're so stupid. Oh, you're so foolish. Oh, some people even there say, I regret the day I gave birth to you, and things like that. Those harsh words. I don't think I ever heard my dad, say any of those things to me. So I didn't grow up, but the few that were said, particularly by one of my parents, the few things that were said to me, like, you're very careless, and I heard it over and over and over. I guess I was very scattered as a young child. I think I was. It's a miracle how I'm very organized now. But I guess I was very scattered. I don't know why. I can't remember what exactly caused that phrase to keep coming over and over. I'm very careless. I'm very careless. I guess I was clumsy, but I heard it so many times that it became my belief, part of my belief system as an adult. And it took a lot of work for me to undo that programming, see myself differently and learn to talk to myself kindly. So the things you're saying to your child become their self talk, whether you mean it or not. Even if you don't mean it, if you keep saying, oh, your brother is better than you, why can't you be like your brother, you can't do anything right, oh, you're always so careless, you're dumb, you're this, if it is the anthem, just like, we don't need to think I don't need to think about the Korean anthem. Anytime I'm anywhere, they say sing the anthem, I can sing it. I've not sang it for years, but it's still in my mind. Why? Because it was an anthem. It was spoken over and over and over and over for primary school, secondary. I kept on singing it over and over. So it's now second nature to me. So if you keep saying certain things to your children over and over and over, you're increasing the seed you're planting, but you're also multiplying the harvest that is to come. And it will stay with your child. So this is even for believing parents, right? We know that words are seeds. We are taught that death and life are in the power of the tongue. But do you pay attention to these small moments, these small things that we have talked about, right? Can you identify some of the things that you are saying in those small moments that seem like they are harmless? But from this session, you're realizing now that they will still bring you the kind of harvest you don't want. Even if you're doing once a week prophecy on your children or you're speaking blessing on them, but how many times are you undoing it? You have to pay attention to it. What are those small things, small phrases that I keep using over and over that will not give me the harvest that I want? So you need to do the work to replace labels with behavior focused language. All right? Replace labels that condemn your child with behavior focused language. Instead of you are lazy, you can just describe what is happening. I notice that you haven't started yet. Let's talk about what is holding you back. To talk about what is happening, you don't necessarily have to use a label. You're foolish. That was a foolish thing to do. I think I've said this one already. But I know you can make wiser choices. Now, listen to that second part. Instead of saying you are foolish, tell your child, that was a foolish thing to do. But I know you can be kinder. I say this often to my first. That was a very harsh thing to say to your brother. I know that you can be kinder with your words. How can you say it better? I give the child a second chance. Or another common one I would say, when I really, really, sometimes your child does something that is wicked. Instead of saying you're such a wicked child, say, no, that was a wicked thing to do. That was a hurtful thing to do. That was an unkind thing to do. I know that you can be kinder. You have a good heart. So you speak to what you want to see. Speak to the part of the child that you really, really want to address to produce the kind of results that you want. Don't speak, don't call your child by their behavior. Point your child towards the right behavior that you want to see. That is more productive, So that was a foolish thing to do, but I know you can make wiser choices. You're too careless. Instead of you're too careless, say you didn't handle this thing with care. I know that you can, be more careful. So speak to the child you want to see, not just the child that you have in front of you. Instead of good girl, Say, I appreciate how you did this. I appreciate how you showed kindness. I appreciate how patient you were. I love that you were so, generous when you got this thing and all of that. So speak about what you want to see more of. Don't just use a generic phrase to define the good thing your child is doing. Good girl, bad boy, good girl, good boy. No, right? Limit that and use more of things that will point your child towards the kind of behavior that you want to see more of. Now, the last phrase I'm going to try to give you replacement for is, why can't you be like? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like so and so? Why can't you, do this the way the other person does it? So just learn to focus on, I think one of the antidotes to this particular parent who struggles with comparison is to compare your child with themselves. If you really want to talk about, sometimes, comparison comes from a place of good intention. The parent knows that the child can do better. The parent expects that the child can should do better, because they are bigger. Let's say you have a teenage child, who does something worse than their sibling who is far younger than them. It's very tempting to want to be like, but I don't get it. What the parent is trying to say is, you're bigger by all natural, measures. You're supposed to be better at this than your brother. So it's better to look at the child's progress. What is this child doing? Has this child been doing this thing better before? So instead of saying, why can't you do this? Why can't you just do your chores like your brother? Tell your child, the other day you did your chores so well. What's happening today? That's comparing your child with themselves. That is more productive. So your child knows that the measure for their progress or for their good outcome should be themselves, not other people. Because children who are constantly compared learn to also compare themselves all the time with other people, and that can derail them from the path of purpose. Because everyone is on a unique journey, but we can be inspired by other people. All right. So I value you. I value your unique strength. Talk about something that is good about the child. You can say, oh, you're good in this area. What's happening in this area? Instead of saying, why can't you be like your brother? Because every child has their strengths. And when we compare children in the area of their weakness with someone else, it's actually unfair, because the child really can't win in that particular battle if that's their area of weakness. But if you compare the child using the child's own strength, say you are good here. So you point out to the child, you have areas where you're good at, where you're great, but you need to work in this area. All right. So write down 3 phrases that you use often. If you can identify just 3 of these, two, we've talked about so many things. We've talked about, comparison. We've talked about, using behavior labels. We've talked about so many things, right? Don't leave this session without identifying at least 3 labels or phrases that you use often with your children. Are you very used to using insultive words, that actually directly attack the child or directly condemn your kids? Or do you find yourself using these small hidden ones? You're too mouthy, you're too slow, another common one. You never listen. You want your child to learn to listen. You don't get them to learn to listen by telling them that they never listen. That's already a sentence. You've already concluded. So there's no point trying to change your mind. Right? So write down at least 3 phrases that you use often. Because the key to helping you break the cycle is to first of all find out, what are you saying? What am I saying often that I need to change? If you don't know it, you can't change it. If you don't know what you're saying often that you need to work on, it could be comparison, comparing your kids with each other. It could be labeling the child by what you're seeing. You're a liar or you're a thief. What you see or what the child does often, that's what you're using to label the child. So while that may be the reality of their behavior tendencies, it is, I'm sure, that's not what you want your child to become. So you don't call them that. All right. You keep calling them by what you expect or by what you hope they can become, not just what they are in the moment. All right. So words are seeds, and labels can either reinforce your connection with your children or can make them bitter and push them away. Another thing about labels is that when you are a parent who constantly uses harsh labels with your children, think about the person who's always calling you names, who's always teasing you or saying funny things about you. When you have a problem, you can't go to that person, because that only gives them more room. Okay, let's just take, for example, the parent calls their child careless, right? So if my parent always calls me careless, that's the label the parent uses often. And then I happen to damage something or lose something or have a problem that points to how something was poorly handled. do you think I will come to that parent who labels me careless with that problem? Because obviously the parent will say, aha, yes, that's why you're always careless, right? That's exactly the reason why I will not bring it to my parents, because I know that that will reinforce what they have been saying. And I'm sure you can relate with this. Think about the things your parents will say about you. Maybe you're wicked, or you're careless, or you're this, or you're that. If you make a mistake that reinforces what they were saying, you will hide it. You will not bring it to them. You better go. Some people better die with it than take it there. Why? Because they will tell you, I know be talk. Because you don't want to reinforce what your parent has been saying, so you hide it. One of the things to look at, or look out for on your parenting journey. Sometimes pay attention to the areas where your kids try to hide often. For me, this is it's like a litmus test, because sometimes as parents, circumstances can shape you in ways that you might not realize. Maybe your dynamic with your kids can switch because you're going through stress, maybe financially, or you're going through something, and in that season you become a different parent to your kids. Their behaviors or their tendencies can help you recognize if you have if your environment is no longer safe as it used to be. But what I'm trying to say really is how the areas where your child always tries to hide, all right, don't just get upset that they're hiding, but try to ask yourself, why does this child always feel the need to hide this particular struggle from me? All right. Why is it that the child feels the need to hide this particular struggle from me? You can look at what you've been saying. Is it something you're saying? Is it how you correct? Is it how you approach whenever they bring up challenges in that area? Right? How do you approach it? Do you harshly condemn? Do you harshly criticize? The child will not come to you with it, because the child is telling themselves, if I go, my mom will only keep saying this. So how you receive, if there's one moment where you need to really work on your self-control, is when your child voluntarily brings you a challenge that you could never have known otherwise. Mark, please take note of what I'm saying. All right. There'll be moments on your parenting journey where your child will come and tell you that they took something without your permission, or they will tell you something that happened in school that they did that was wrong, or they will bring some kind of struggle to you on their own without you asking. How you handle that little will determine how much more access they will give you in future. You may apologize with that. You may even, buy sweets and make up for it, or but your child will remember how you received them in that moment. God will give us grace, because there are some things, sometimes there are some things your child. I think. Let me see if I can think of one off the top of my head. Maybe it had to do with something that you bought that was I think I remember something, and that was just a kitchen utensil, something that I bought to use for an important occasion or something, and my child had broken it. And you're coming to come and prepare for an occasion. Maybe you had a big jar of mayonnaise in the house and you thought it's still there, you're banking on how to use it, and your child just tells you, Mama, that your mayonnaise, I broke it, the other day. You can imagine that, the child is telling you free of charge. You didn't ask, you didn't even, the child volunteered the information. It should count for something when children just open up about, things that you could not have known otherwise. The child brings it to you on their own without anybody forcing them or coercing them or any evidence. The child just brought it to you. Those moments are very, very precious, but they also determine how much more access you get in future. Because if you mishandle that one, you're telling your child, I cannot be trusted with small. So the child will not bring big. And if you're still raising kids who are still in the primary level, you still have the whole teenage years to go through. So all of these small instances are the things your children will remember when they get into certain situations where they might be contemplating whether or not to come to you. You want to stay approachable as a parent. This does not mean be permissive, but it's all about the dynamic. Sometimes the things you say, are you judgmental? Are you are you a critic? How much uplifting do you do versus how much condemning you're doing? Are you always criticizing, focusing on the bad, focusing on the wrong? How much effort do you place on finding the good and pointing it out? Every person wants to be told about the areas where they are winning. Sometimes as parents, we get to a place where our dynamic is only correction, 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 correction. Just correcting and criticizing and correcting and criticizing, and you could forget completely to build with your words. So you have to be intentional with how you're using your words as a parent. Words are, I think, one of the most powerful tools every parent has. How you use your words. You're either building your children or you're tearing them down with your words. There is no in between, right? Either if they had to put the sum total of the things you say to your child in a day on a scale, a scale has a balance, right? So they have to put the sum total of the words you're speaking in a day to your kids on a scale. So this is build and this is damage. How will the scales tip? Will it tip more towards building the majority of what you spoke uplifted and built, or would it tip this way? The majority of what you spoke discouraged, damaged, and brought your children down. So that would be a fruit of what is the context? What are you talking about all the time? The words you're releasing, what do they address? Do they encourage? Do they discourage? What is it? So you need to figure it out. But if you don't sit down to reflect and find it, you will not see it, because they usually only come up under moments where you're under pressure, or where you're going through stress, or where you're frustrated with your kids. So try to listen to the things you're sometimes. Oh, you can also ask your kids. Yeah, you can ask your kids, right? If they are bigger, you can ask them. Sometimes in this, some of these small jokes where you tell your kids, or make believe play, you tell your kids, oh, act like mommy. Those are the moments where you hear the things you always say. The kids will act it into drama and they'll tell you the things you always. So sometimes you don't even realize that you're saying those things to your kids because you are blinded by your emotions. So ask your kids. If they're big enough, you can ask them. If there's something I always say to you that you don't like, your kids will tell you, because they remember. There's something about those words, those labels, those phrases, that like rub salt in our kids' wounds. They don't like it. They will remember. So if you're if you're humble enough, ask your children. They can help you. You can ask them, is there something I say to you often that you don't like? Is there something I say very often, if you just want to know? Because sometimes they may not even know that what you're saying is not good. So ask them, is there something mommy always says? Sometimes they'll be able to pick it up, you know. And then from there you can begin to do the work to reset, you know, remove that programming and set in something that is much, much better. So I encourage you, as always, one of the things you have to work on your parenting journey is building a safe environment. And whether you like it or not, your words, right, also shape or define the quality of the environment your kids are growing up in. You can be raising your kids in the most plush home, right? Comfortable chairs, comfortable everything, but your words have made the environment hostile. Your words have made the environment something that is suffocating and stifling the growth, or the thriving of your kids. So you really want to work on it. How are your words building, or are they tearing down your children? You need to be able to answer that question for yourself. And of course, I always encourage parents, there is always room for learning. When you come in to learn, don't aim to just leave with more knowledge. Aim to be empowered to take action. So don't just go and sit on it. Take a pen, take a paper after the session. Sit down, write down your own phrases. What is my anthem as a parent? Ask your children. Do it. Actually take action, because every time you open your mouth, you are either building or you're tearing down. So you want to at least be doing more of building than tearing down. But hopefully, of course, you want to be able to use your words to build your own children into better versions of themselves. All right. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. I will be open for a few minutes. And of course, remember that we are already enrolling for the next edition of the 1 year program. I think here we have, in the mix, we have the No Yelling Challenge is going on for those who signed up for that. We have the 1 year program, level 1 and level 2 are currently also in session. But note that the next edition is already enrolling. We do that very, very early. But this year in particular, we have decided to make waiting more rewarding. One of the things I heard people say last year in particular, particularly those who came in to try to sign up very early, they were like, the wait is too long. You come to sign up in March, it starts all the way in December. So we are working to make the waiting worth your while by creating a waiting forum where you get to have access to courses and lots of learning material that can keep you doing some work, at least, building yourself while you wait. And to partake in this, you just have to at least book a slot, You join the specially created waiting forum for the program, and then you gain access to all courses, all material, whether it's my book, it's guides. There's a lot that you can actually begin to use to edify yourself while you wait. So you're not starting from zero when you come in December. If you want to know more about the 1 year program, just send me a chat. You can write DR365 in the comments, or you reach out to me on WhatsApp to know more. All right, there are no questions. Thank you all so much for sticking right to the end. And please subscribe to our channel, because when you subscribe, it helps the content that we put out there to reach many more people, but also it also helps you know whenever we upload new content. Thank you so much for being here, and don't forget to share this with someone, some other parent out there who might be benefit from learning that just by changing the things they say to their kids every day, they can actually greatly improve their results in terms of behavior, in terms of their relationship with their kids, but also in terms of the harvest that is going to come. All right, harvest day will not fail. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you again at the next one. Bye.